A recent report by the South African Cities Network has found that 1 in 5 people in Johannesburg and Cape Town live in informal settlements. The organization says factors such as unemployment and in-migration contribute to these figures. Let's unpack the report further now, bringing the South African Cities Network's Programs Project Manager, Kyla Brown, who's with us via our video link this morning. Kyla, it's lovely to see you. Thanks very much indeed for being on the program. Let's begin by better placing that figure. 1 in 5 people, specifically in Johannesburg and Cape Town, that's about 20%. Is this an improvement or signs of a deteriorating situation?
Right, thank you. So while this is quite an overwhelming statistic, when we look at this data historically contextualized, we can actually see that the number of informal households has actually been slowly dropping in the last 20 years. And because the State of Cities report is produced every 5 years, it's very easy to make these comparisons across the cities and over time. So the city of Cape Town was actually the only city that had an increase in informality between 2015 and 2018, and that increase was quite small. But then on the other hand, this data on informal households is from 2018. So it's pre-pandemic. It's not taking into account the effects of COVID and the pandemic. So if we were to look at data from 2020 or 2021, we might see a slightly different picture. It's also important to understand that informality is very much related to perceptions of economic opportunity. Mm-hmm. So, for example, Nelson Mandela Bay has very low levels of informality, the lowest out of all of the cities. But it's also the city that's grown the least in terms of population. So it's not that surprising. The city is not really seen as a place of massive economic opportunity. And then when we look at stats around population increases in city of Joburg and city of Cape Town, and the huge population increases that we've seen over there, and understanding that many of these new entrants to the city are settling in informal spaces, I think it is a little bit redeeming for the State of Cities' performance overall. But I think the point really is that if we are going to keep up with very fast rates of urbanization in the next few decades, we do really need to increase our delivery capability.
So interesting what you've just mentioned around informality being some kind of proxy, if you like, for economic opportunities. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. It reminds me of something that Helen Ziller once said in the media. And I'm just going to, pull up the exact quote, and perhaps you can speak to us about whether or not the data you find through your work corroborates what she's claimed. She says, to be poor in an area like Langa in Cape Town is 100, probably 1,000 times better than to be poor in many townships in the rest of the country. Like, whether it's by 100 or 1,000-fold is secondary. But is she getting to something that you've been able to identify, that being poor in or informality in different cities is experienced in varying ways?
Absolutely. So I think what she's talking to is proximity to economic opportunity. And this is where we really start to think about issues of spatial transformation, which is something that the State of Cities report is trying to unpack as well in its chapters. And really what we're trying to see here is, are people able to move closer to areas of economic opportunity? And it is quite difficult to get data on these stats because we know, cities are expanding, and as they expand, they continue to sprawl, and people end up getting further and further away from areas of economic opportunity, and it's very hard for city governments to control that sprawl. But if we are going to build much more sustainable cities going forward, we really need to focus on compacting our cities and allowing the poorest of the poor to be the closest to areas of economic opportunity.
Yeah. To what extent can we still pin these trends on apartheid spatial planning versus the failures of the government of the day?
I think that's a difficult question, and it's obviously a combination of both factors there. But I think what the State of Cities report is really getting to is how can we build better going forward. And it's really talking about partnership and collaboration. And the cities that the challenges that our cities face are so vast, both because of our inherited apartheid spatial planning, but also, in the future because of the challenges that climate change will present. The challenges are so vast, it's going to take much more than city governments doing it alone. And we really need to come together as all of society, all of government as well, across the spheres of government, working together on a shared vision for our cities.
Yeah. Do we have examples, Kyla, perhaps in the work that you've been able to do, perhaps even out of South Africa, of cities that don't have inequalities that are as stark as what we're seeing in parts of South Africa, where there's greater homogeneity across the entire city versus the dynamic, for instance, we have in Johannesburg, where an Alex and a Sandton are on the opposite economic spectrums, but are right next to each other?
Absolutely, they are. And I think the report tells many stories about very good work that is being done across all of South African cities. I think there are many good projects being done, but even more importantly, I think it is about identifying good institutional processes, because I think the challenges ultimately lie in the institutional structures and the procedures which shape what gets done in a city. And so while there are cases of collaboration between government and all sectors of society, these cases are often quite isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And they often require city officials to circumvent very stringent bureaucratic processes and procedures that they're beholden to. So there's certainly shifts within the institutional framework that are necessary in order to make it easier for this collaboration to happen in much more constructive and creative ways.
Yeah. Within communities where informality is a lived reality, if that makes sense, you've also found that there's varying levels of food insecurity. The city of Cape Town coming in, worst, you found that in the city of Cape Town, food insecurity is worse. What are the determining factors around something like that?
Yes, and the stats that we have on food insecurity are more current than the informality data. So we're seeing the effects of the global pandemic there. And when we look at our unemployment stats as well, I think we're seeing a similar picture where over the last 20 years, we have achieved a lot, and food insecurity and unemployment has been slowly dropping. And then when you look at the 2020 stats, you do see that increase, which is incredibly demoralizing when you think that, we have made some wins over time at the city level. And then something like the pandemic can really just undermine all of that progress. So then I think it's really about thinking about resilience, this concept of resilience, and going forward, that concept is going to become even more important in the face of climate change challenges.
Fascinating findings. Thanks very much indeed for exploring them with us. Really do appreciate your time. Kyla Brown is the programs manager, or the programs project manager at the South African Cities Network. Once again, Kyla, thanks very much indeed.